Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Heading into the third year and the fifth wave of the pandemic, facets of the retail landscape continue to play catch-up with the rapidly evolving consumer behavior and brand strategy. So, in this episode, let's take a moment to refresh our look at the latest trends that are influencing consumers and brands in the ongoing COVID era. Jackie Cooper, Global Chief Brand Officer and Senior Advisor at Edelman, joins me from across the pond in London for today's deep dive on the voice of retail. Jackie stands on years of entrepreneurial experience in global brand, creative, and business strategy, and calls on her work to guide us through a reality check on the evolution of retail marketing in the post-pandemic world.
You know, your advice is to double it. I agree with. I think, you know, retailers and were for the most part late to social, so they're getting a head start. You know, they have to catch up. With the D2C businesses that have had a head start above them. Then we also see everything that's exploding with the metaverse and NFTs. You've got to look at that and you've got to embrace that.
Let's listen in now. Jackie, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. Now, I think you're on the other side of the pond physically. Where am I reaching you today?
I am physically in London.
Lovely.
I am spiritually in a global job, so on calls all around the world. So It's a very strange existence right now.
Well, let's talk about your strange existence. I mean, pre and the before time, you must have spent a minute or two or an hour or two on airplanes. How's that transition been like for you from going to, I mean, in your role, we'll talk about what you do and who you do it for, but I imagine that's been a tremendous change in how you work and how you live, yeah?
It hasn't actually been as much for me as it has been for some people. Some of my colleagues were constantly on airplanes and going from country to country, as so much of our work are, if you're working on stuff where there's global team, then quite often a chunk of you have to be on Zoom calls anyway. So I haven't actually travelled as much in the last few years before COVID as I had prior. When I was doing fashion, I was literally on a plane every 6 weeks. You know, the different things have driven different experiences for me with travel. But I think when you're working with global teams, you know, there's a country's always right for a few of you, but not for all of you. So I've been really lucky, actually. I think this hasn't affected me as much as some people.
Well, this is actually my second interview from London or from Europe. I was speaking to someone, Dana Thomas, you remember from, or not you remember, but from the fashion industry. She's an author based in Paris. So it's great to be on over in Europe and get that global view. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, both just, you know, basically from what you've written and your role. So why don't we jump right in? Tell the listeners about who you are and a bit about your background and then what you do at Edelman.
Well, thank you. I'm a person who didn't do well at all in formal education. It was really not for me. I'm very creatively minded and some might say strangely minded, and the sort of formality of education didn't work for me. So as soon as I could, I got out to be in the workplace, and I got a summer job in a PR firm at the age of 18 and really felt like I'd come home. Suddenly my slightly strange brain process seemed to actually be welcomed, and I stayed there for a few years, worked my way up. It was a consumer brand PR firm, and then went sort of into business and more industrial orientated PR. And so learned so much about how media works, how to compile a story, how to get a narrative right. And so after a few jobs, I ended up making a big mistake, actually. Got headhunted into a job where my gut told me not to do this job, but it was a lot of money and I was flattered. And within 6 weeks, I realized that was really, really wrong. And I went from the sublime to the ridiculous. I left that agency, had a lot of money, and went to work for Greenpeace for £45 a week and launched their anti-fur trade campaign, which was controversial. And I realized that I loved the controversy and I loved the storytelling and I loved the sort of battle to get stories into media, but I didn't really like the politics of companies. And I started freelancing, which led me to then set up my own agency. Jackie Cooper PR traded for 15 years. We had amazing cultural moments in the UK, predominantly the retirement of Concorde, the rising of the arch for the Wembley Stadium. We also worked on international business, Italian designer Emilio Cavallini, I ran Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen's business globally for many years, which was my first experience was working with retail in the US with Walmart when their line was sold there. And then Richard Edelman came along and visited us one day when we were casting for the Wonder Bra ad. And he tells this story to this day that he really hadn't ever been into a reception in a PR agency where there were a load of lingerie models waiting to get a job. And he said, "This is good. I'd like
just another day. Here. Just another day in the lobby." Yeah.
And so we sold our business to Edelman. And that was an amazing thing for me. My mum comes from Manhattan and my family are all from New York. And I loved that I was working with a business that was, established so well in the US and had really founded PR, consumer PR. Dan Edelman had established what that was, so many years ago. And it's been an amazing journey, leading creative in the UK. I then went on to lead global creative and employed over 600 people around the world to be formally in our business as as a creative global force. And then last year took on this mantle of chief brand officer. I'm working on, the business of brands, which is really where my heart is, that sort of intersection of brand, culture, entertainment, and sort of moments in people's lives. It's a great job to have.
Yeah. Now, this isn't a podcast. Our interview isn't really focused on your observations of consumers, but I can't have you on the mic without talking a little bit about your tradecraft and how that's changed over the course of your career. I mean, from social media influencers, it's not like influencers is new. There were always product placement, I guess we would have called it. So what's been the most startling change that you've experienced and I guess in your tradecraft, different ways that you work from when you began your career to what you do today or what the firm does today?
I think the main thing is that we're not the poor relations of the marketing mix anymore. We're actually the lead of the marketing mix. So when I was, a publicist, the advertising agencies were the lead and the advertising creative was kind of the arrowhead and then everything else came behind that. And we were sort of amplifying a 30-second spot or a poster or a byline. And now it's so much more woven into, a conversation, a story, a visual, which is really how PR people are trained. So suddenly our craft is really, really relevant for all areas of the marketing mix. We're not anymore the poor relations. We're quite often leading as an agency of record. And PR people are quite often inherently and sort of just naturally able to drive, multi-format, multi-platform campaigns in ways that they have always had the skill set, but it wasn't as needed as it is now. And so that's been really liberating for our industry.
Have you found, concurrent with that more prominent role, more focus or more emphasis or more demands for measurement of impact of the traditional PR versus the advertising? I mean, advertising, you run impressions, you get you get views. Has that brought with it more demands for measurement and accountability?
100%, because I think grown-up marketing people of maturity and sophistication have probably grown up within an advertising model and that measurement. And so if they're moving money and spend into areas that don't have that sort of traditional benchmark, they absolutely need the reassurance of impact. And so we've had to spend as much time making sure that we can do that. I always say that DXI, our sort of data and analytics and research arm, make us invincible. They make our ideas invincible because they can support and give the backbone to the idea or give a backbone to the knowledge that we have of the audience or give a temperature check on the impact of it by the research and the data. And our clients absolutely need that if they're spending money in slightly unusual ways for them. To many clients, this is still somewhat untraditional to not lead with advertising. To the more sort of on the edge or contemporary clients, it's obviously second nature to them now. But yes, measurement is fundamentally needed.
Well, we've kind of great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that feedback. Let's talk about Edelman. I mean, for my listeners, that would be a super familiar name, but as I often find, they might know the name, but not the full scope and scale of the enterprise. So talk to us about Edelman.
Well, we're really a very large firm. We're the world's largest communications firm. We're global. Our legacy and heritage, as I've sort of mentioned, is in PR. Dan Edelman, who founded the firm, I think was sort of one of the first people to ever run a consumer roadshow in the world. He had this amazing ability to mix consumer knowledge with business knowledge, and was a journalist in his heart. And so this has been the legacy of this business over the decades. What maybe people might not know, if they do know Edelman, I think quite often people think that we're a sort of corporate communications firm, but actually half of our business, nearly 50% of our business, comes from brand and consumer marketing, and in work that has historically been done by ad agencies, and we're taking on more and more of that work. When I took over and established our sort of first formal creative network, we went to the Cannes Lions Festival for the first time, which was an immense challenge for us. But we've won awards at Cannes, which has really been a fantastic experience for everybody in the teams. And this year, or last year as it is now, we won our first Cannes Lion Grand Prix as a standalone entrant, which was amazing for our work with ASICS, and the campaign was called Eternal Run. So I guess the key thing about Edelman's work is that we're sort of very driven by action and impact. It's sort of beyond PR and marketing. We're actually encouraging our clients to understand that consumers and stakeholders need to see action, and we're sort of weaving our campaigns and our narratives for clients into the tapestry of people's lives. And that's sort of very, very multi-channel, omni-channel work. It's a great time to be in this business, actually.
Well, I guess, and your role reflects that, right? Chief Brand Officer. When Kelsey first reached out, I'm like, they have a brand officer. That's interesting. Let's learn more about that. So I guess that's encompassed in the transformation of the organization. So you took a long train ride up to Scotland and you penned a note about your thoughts on retail concerns, inside optimism. I had to look through it. Very interesting stuff. Take the listeners through your thoughts. These are crazy days. I often talk about this circuit breaker of behavior that has been the COVID era, and trying to understand the difference between short-term adaptations by consumers versus long-term structural changes. How have you been thinking about this time in your work, and take us through that?
Well, for those who don't know, Scotland's a long way on the train. So it is actually a long way. So it's 6 hours, to ruminate on the world. And it's a really, I think, a wonderful thing to have this train cut through from London through the whole, length of the country. And I got picked up. It's a journey that I do kind of fairly regularly, and for a client. And I got picked up by the driver, and he could never park near the station, so he always ended up going through parts of the streets of Glasgow. And I couldn't believe how many shops were shut. And I realised that I'd been living in this bubble of COVID life in my house in London, and sometimes making it to the office, but not really. I've loved always walking streets and looking at stores and seeing what's happening, and I'd missed that. And the big shops had gone, and I'd gone to pick someone up at St Pancras Station, and a lot of the shops there had shut down, which is where a lot of the travellers would come into the Fortnum and Masons, or the big name shops like John Lewis. And yet the Oxford Street itself was super, super busy. So a lot of this is connected to money. Parts of Scotland are challenged with the economy. Some of their COVID restrictions were different to the English restrictions. But I think what really got me thinking was, what's going to happen with shopping, and how do we have this habit in our life, and what's going to make us go back out? And actually, Jamie Oliver and I were talking about his amazing experience in the first lockdown, where he went and cooked in his kitchen literally filming on a phone and releasing stuff for Channel 4, releasing, mini TV shows that Channel 4 couldn't get enough of, because the British public were like, yes, this is what I need. I need Jamie to tell me, how do I swap out things? How do I cook with what I've got in my cupboard, because I can't go out to the shops so much. And we were talking about super solver brands, where the companies that we really loved during this time were the brands that had basically nailed, being accessible, being agile, being affordable, and being online. And so the Glasgow experience was, well, I'm not going to be mooching around the shops on a Saturday and then having lunch out. And if I'm not doing that, then a lot of the stores are going to lose their footfall and lose what they're relying on to survive. And so, we were shopping as utility shoppers, but we weren't shopping socially. And of course, then as soon as COVID lifts, we wanted to go back to that, because there is something about being in a shop and having that social experience that's really, really important, and getting to know the people behind the till. And I think we were talking in the office about the fact that you suddenly talk to people behind the till in a different way post-COVID, because you're actually so glad to be out and speaking to them, and we've all gone through something together. So you sort of share these stories in a way that you perhaps wouldn't acknowledge that person. So we have this sort of utility shopping, which is just what we need, and how we have to get the super solver brands to help us, or the super solver stores to help us. We have the social shopping, where we just want everything to feel normal, and we want to chat and we want to be out there. And then we have what Forbes magazine actually covered, which was revenge shopping, which is just, I'm here, I'm out, and I'm desperate to just have my revenge on this, restricted existence, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy stuff. And so we kind of, that trip to Glasgow prompted me to sort of look at what's going on with those sort of habits, and how it's an emotional thing, shopping for us. It's not just about getting stuff. And so the emotion hopefully will come back as we come out of the grips of COVID.
Yeah, it's actually my podcast partner, Steve Dennis, who talks about the word bifurcation specifically. We talk about a spectrum as well, where on the one end there's efficiency and on the other end there's experience. And it's been our experience, I'm curious for your insight, that both need to exist concurrently. I mean, you might shop online, which, at its best is often just very efficient, right? There's low emotional engagement. Maybe you're subscribing to get your detergent delivered each and every day, but it really needs to be a mix of both. How do you see retailers and brands resolving these two things? I mean, mostly I think they need to pick a spot, but how do you see it, and how do you see it coming out of the COVID era? Is it even that much more important to pick that spot and be, as Steve would say, remarkable?
When you've experienced something, we can't pretend we haven't, right? So we've experienced better online shopping, and we've missed the experience of in real life shopping. And so I think both things are going to have to raise their game. We have a need to be out there. We're social creatures. We want to experience new things. We're hungry for feeling good in those experiences, and shopping's, magic is the release of endorphins when you have something that you love, or you've found something that makes you feel better. But we also have the need for the support of just what we have to have in our life, and the groceries that feed our family. And we don't necessarily want to go schlapping around the supermarket anymore. We'd like it to come to our doorstep, and we'd like to be able to get it into the kitchen quicker and get stuff on. So I think we can't put the lid back on what we've had. What we've missed, we will embrace. And what we've experienced that's made life easier, I think we're going to want to know more about, and we're going to want more of.
There's a lot of changes of shopping behaviors, bigger baskets, fewer trips. I mean, those are really driven by, I just want to, I want to be safe when I shop, and it's an unusual time. Are you thinking about any of these permanent structural changes in behaviors? For example, Walmart in the US is launching a service, and actually they launched it pre-COVID, but they're gearing it back up again, where they'll actually deliver and put groceries into your house, into the fridge. Their associates wear body cameras when they're doing it, so you can watch them do it. That, or what's been called anticipatory retail. In other words, don't order anything. It's just going to show up. Do you think these things are going to become a bigger thing? Or is it a counterforce, kind of the roaring 20s argument that people just are so missing experience that there's a renaissance or a revitalization of physical retail? How do you think that's going to play out? And what are you seeing so far?
I think maybe this is going to split, but the quality of both is going to have to go up. I was attending a breakfast at the beginning of this year when we came back to work, a virtual breakfast with a lot of different brands, supermarkets, banks, and everyone was talking about experiential, and everyone was talking about the fact that they felt they had to be much more innovative in the experiential space, and that the theatre of retail was going to be demanded by consumers as they came back. And I don't think they saw it, Michael, in the sort of 1920s way. I just think they saw it in a way that, well, we've actually, unfortunately, opened a door to more expectation and more competition, because if we're not something different and we're not something that really engages people and makes them feel inspired, they're just going to click and collect or click
right.
and get delivered. And that's easier. And the one thing that we have less of is time. So, when we're working from home, or as someone said to me, I'm actually living at work now, there is much less time. We might be at home, but it doesn't mean we have time to do more things. So I think the need for convenience means that we're going to be tougher on wherever we get our supplies from. The need for inspiration means that we're going to be tougher on the experience that you give me, the innovation that you give me. And I think the need for that sort of emotional feeding is going to be as much as that need for convenience and safety feeding. And we've just done some research around Gen Z, which has been fascinating, because this generation are desperate for safety. You know, when you go to my local supermarket yesterday, you know, you expect now to see the hygiene prep.
It's table stakes right now, right?
When you go in, right?
Yeah. It's table stakes right now, right? I mean, you mentioned time, and I want to hang on that note for a second, follow that thread. So I don't know how many people are going to go back to work in the office full time. I think anyone who thinks that everybody and conversely nobody is going back to work in an office is probably wrong on both ends of the spectrum. I want to talk about time as an artificial construct, because I bet there's lots of brands who, when they brief you, say, I want to address the time pressed, the time short, the time poor consumer. And I have to think, though, that there's got to be some upside in this transformation of how we work. You even relating how, you know, you travel less, which is very time consuming. Do you think that do you expect your briefings to change a little bit? Like, I know that the demands of family don't change. In some way, they got worse, you know, homeschooling. But let's say post-COVID, more people are working from home instead of spending those hours and hours commuting. Are you starting to hear that or talk about that with the brands and the retailers you speak with?
100%. We feel that hybrid is 100% here to stay, and the service aspect of how brands have to show up is so much more a focus, right? So not only the service of what the brands do for you beyond the product that they supply, how the brands show up, where the brands show up, how you get the brand delivered to you, how you embrace the brand online, or how the brand gives you the experience in real life, and also what the brand does away from the product. So, you know, the purpose part of the brand, or how it's giving back to the planet, or the transparency of how it treats its employees. All of these areas are now coming into our briefs because we ask questions of the company and the brand way beyond where we used to be. And so these are definitely affecting how we're being briefed, definitely affecting how clients are asking us to sort of provide our services. And we're no longer just having brand teams on the business. We've got purpose teams, we've got data teams, we've got retail specialist teams. We have, you know, the retail is a specialist sector for us. And that's way before you even get into, you know, creativity and measurement. So they're no longer the divisions. And while we do talk about our brand business being so much part of the whole of our universe, you know, equally the corporate companies are being much more aware of their need to show up as a brand and almost to have semi-retail experiences with their employees and with their stakeholders. So it's a really interesting merging of areas that's definitely affecting how we're being asked to be partners to our clients.
So I was reading a study that, and I've talked to many retailers who've shared this experience and many brands, that the estimate is about 45% of consumers shopped a new brand either out of necessity, maybe boredom, or, 40, in our lifetimes, 45% shift of anything is unheard of, right? We fight for single points of share with some of your brands. Does brand still matter in all this? Because is that what drove trial? Like, are you doubling down on, with your clients, and your clients doubling down on the importance of brand? And you've mentioned, sustainability and other deeper attributes. Is that even more important? Has that been accelerated by COVID, or has it gone sideways?
Yeah, there's this great quote from John Furner from Walmart, who said recently that loyalty in retail is the absence of something better. When they find it, they're gone.
Yeah.
We think actually that brand matters sort of more, because it is the personality of, and it's almost tribal, right? That what does the brand stand for, and who am I? And then what does the brand stand for? And that sort of recognition that the brand knows me, or I know the brand. And that's why we give the money, and that's why we engage. And then there's that badge moment of, having the bag, or having the garment, or having the product. So I think the brands matter more because we want to have that tribal connection. But then the challenge for the brand is make sure that you show up in a way that consumers today expect you to show up, with the priorities today that the consumers have. And they ask very searching questions beyond the look and feel, right? So the consumer wants to understand the supply chain, understand the provenance of the product, understand how the manufacturing is done, and how the employees are treated. And so brand now stands for so much more than just the stamp of the look and feel of something. And it's way beyond how clever your creative is. And our Gen Z data shows that actually 9 in 10 of them want brands they buy to actually be involved in causes that better the world. And 63% of those Gen Z shoppers say that they use or buy brands that actually choose to take a stand. So that's very telling.
Last question for you, and I want to kind of pick up on, again, that thread of the what matters with the people you do business with. Let's talk about social media. So, I was speaking with a CEO of a retailer recently, and they were asking for a bit of advice. And I said, listen, I don't know what your social media budget is, influencer budget, but I suggest you double it. On the other hand, there is, some moral qualms about how much work to do with the platforms. Lush, for example, said, you know what, I don't even want to be involved in social media. It's kind of a last question. It's a bit of a tough one, but how do you see and how do you advise brands who care about all these elements and their presence and use of social media?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if Lush, call me cynical, but I'm wondering if Lush did that just to be different and to get noise, but kind of know that it's not, they are going to take up, they're going to lose some of their audience by doing that. I think that, your advice is to double it. I agree with. I think, retailers and we're for the most part late to social, so they're getting a head start. They have to catch up with the D2C businesses that have had a head start above them. Then we also see everything that's exploding with the metaverse and NFTs. You've got to look at that, and you've got to embrace that. And if you want to be contemporary and you want to reach multi-generations, that's got to be something you've got to put creativity and funds into. And I think you've got to be everywhere, especially when you can earn your way and you don't necessarily have to pay your way. If your story and your content is compelling enough, it'll travel across platforms and works for you and drives momentum. So I think the key thing is make sure your story is magnetic, make sure your content is shareable, and make sure that you put it out there so that some of these social channels can actually do the work for you beyond what you're paying for, which obviously is the backbone of making sure that works too.
Right. Well, great advice. Great way to wrap up a great conversation. I want to thank you again. And how do people get in touch with you or learn more about all the great work that Edelman's doing? Where can they go? And social media, speaking of that, links and all that stuff. Where can they go?
Thanks, Michael. Look, we've got edelman.com, so there's the ability to reach out to us there. I'm on LinkedIn as Jackie Cooper, so please feel free, and thank you so much.
Well, Jackie, it's been a real treat. Thank you again for joining me on The Voice of Retail. I wish you continued success and safe travels. And let's, along with the listeners, explore this new post-COVID world that we're living in. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Michael LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at michaelleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.